welcome to week 2. For today's lecture, we're going to cover a few things. We're going to discuss experience design rules a little bit further from our sync meetings last week. It became clear that I didn't provide you with enough information to understand the difference between the rules, so I'm just going to go over that a bit more. We're going to talk about design thinking. This is a particularly modern way of looking about how we solve problems. And I think it's important for you guys to know, even though it isn't actually part of this course, you might be learning about design thinking in another course, but I think it's very relevant when we're talking about research. The importance of research. We're going to talk about research strategies, and I'm going to give you your first assignment, which is problem and empathy mapping. So let's talk about rules and experience design. We went over this last week, but let's do it once more for clarity. So an IA is an information architect. This is an organizational rule. It looks at kind of blocking information and figuring out sections and categories. Basically taking the information that needs to be displayed on a site or an app and putting it into categorizing it in ways that are easy for the user or the audience to make sense of. User experience, UX or user experience design, that is kind of taking the groupings and categories that the information architect has established and starts laying out wireframes, which are essentially like the blueprints for a building. So a user experience designer takes the material provided by the information architect and uses that to figure out the actual experience for the user. UI, user interface design. This is mostly, you can consider this a graphic designer. So this would be, if you're a web designer, this would be your role. You would take the wireframes generated by the user experience design, and you would create a graphic design of the page. I just want to point out here, I think I said this before, it's becoming more and more common for user experience designers and user interface designers to be the same person. There's different kinds of wireframes. The most basic is called, just called a wireframe originally, which is essentially you using boxes and lines and stuff like that to do a very low fidelity kind of mock-up of what the experience is going to be. We'll see those a little bit later in the course, but the things are now shifting towards doing high fidelity wireframes, which are more like a finished design. So obviously for that you need design skills. So I think that you're going to see user experience design and user interface design more and more kind of be the same role. Interaction design is a more specific form of design. It's more about motion. It's more about animation. So it would be like, does the page slide over when you click next? Does the continue button throb? You know, any kind of anything to do with enhancing the actual interaction on the page. This would be an interaction designer. So this isn't a perfect analogy, but it may serve to make it easier for you to understand the differences between the roles. So if we imagine that doing UX or doing user experience is like building a house, we can kind of map the rules associated with experience design to the rules involved in building a house. And that may make it more sense because we're more aware of what traditional work rules are. So if we can kind of make more sense to you. So, you know, if you're building a house, the different kinds of roles involved with that would be an architect, a move planner, or organizer, somebody that helps kind of put your stuff into boxes and figures out where it's going to go in the new building. An interior designer, which makes the interior of your space beautiful. A drywaller, bricklayer, they build the walls, they do the drywall. Plumber, electrician, they do the kind of the wiring and the plumbing inside the house that makes it all work. So if we try to map those roles to the rules of UX, this is what we kind of come up with. So the move planner, the closet organizer, the person that's figuring out like what stuff you have and where it can go in the new house, that's like an information architect. An architect, well, that's the person who plans and designs the building, does the blueprints essentially that are then handed over to the builders. That would be closest to user experience design. Interior designer, will that be user interface design? So they'd be taking kind of the bare building and making it beautiful inside, and that's what a user interface designer does for the most part. The drywaller, bricklayer, the people that are actually building the house itself, that's like a front end developer. So this is where we're talking about code. I had some questions last week where people thought that an experienced designer had to know how to code, and that is absolutely not true. I think maybe in the past that was more the case, but now the role of user experience designer and designer are quite separate for the most part. I did mention earlier that I think that the two should come together, but in today's world, right this second, UX people and designers are kind of two separate roles, and then you have coders, which is another separate role. So those are three separate things. So the front end developer, they do the coding that brings the design to life. So essentially, they take the user interface design done by the interior designer. They take it and they make it real, very much like a drywaller or a bricklayer or a builder would do with the plans from the interior designer. The plumber and electrician, they hook up the electricity and the plumbing in your house. They're kind of behind the scenes, and they're what makes the building work. There's no point living in a house if you don't have air conditioning and running water and plumbing. It's not going to be a very enjoyable experience. So this is similar to a back-end developer that usually, their role is, this one's a bit fuzzier to kind of explain, but if you think about the database, so a front-end page has to pull data from somewhere, right? The back-end developer would take care of all that stuff. So they'd save user data. They would, if you're using a content management system, the actual content would be in the database. So they'd be responsible for building all that stuff. You don't have to stress too much about that right now. This course really isn't about code or development. So, but you may encounter this in your other classes. You as a designer, you're probably mostly going to be working with a front-end developer rather than a back-end developer. Yeah. So typically, only a large company will have a person for each of those rules we talked about, and it would be a very large company. Like banks have their own teams of UX people, and there would probably be role definition like that in there. A big software company. I'm sure Apple has that. They probably have even more roles. But where you're probably going to end up being employed, at least at the beginning of your career, is probably a smaller company or an agency. And you'll find that for the most part, they don't separate those roles as much. Even down to, at my company, my UX person is a designer as well. So they kind of do the whole experience from soup to nuts. And like I said, in the future, I believe there's going to be a role called experience designer, and that will be somebody who does most of these roles. Maybe not the graphic design portion of it, but most of the roles. In many ways, it doesn't make sense to me to separate them out, but we'll see. So let's talk a little bit about design thinking. Design thinking is sort of a buzzword. And even though design is in this, it isn't strictly about graphic design, though it can be applied to graphic design. Design thinking has been sort of in the works since the 50s, where you had architects, wanting to come up with a way of problem-solving design challenges. And you can understand with an architect, if they make a mistake, the building can fall down. So there was a desire to pull more science into the approach of design problem solving. That evolved throughout the years until I think the 70s or 80s when there was a book written, I'm sorry, I don't have the author's name, not at the tip of my tongue, that first coined the term design thinking. Design thinking now is huge and it's being used in all fields. Um, if we look at like sort of a very kind of uh, complicated definition of what design thinking is an iterative process in which we seek to understand the user, challenge assumptions, and redefine problems in an attempt to identify alternative strategies and solutions that might not be instantly apparent with our initial level of understanding. Okay, that's a whole lot of stuff. Um, if we wanted to break this down, it's essentially, so let me stop and step back a little bit. You know, a lot of design problem solving in the past has just been a person going like, wouldn't it be better if we did it this way? Or wouldn't it be better if it looked this way? And they often did that in isolation. They had a crazy idea and they wanted to kind of do it. Um, Design thinking makes us step back a little bit and actually talk to the people that might be affected by these design choices and to find out whether this is really the optimal solution. Um, because a lot of times, for me, I work with a ton of businesses and I don't understand their business, right? In the process of developing a website for them or a campaign or something, I will learn more about their business. Um, so there's sort of informal research there. But if you as a designer is approached by a company that does tile work, for example, you're not going to understand their business at all. And you're not going to be able to give useful feedback to them without some understanding. So part of this whole process is research. The idea that you need to look into this and get a better sense of what you're designing for and who you're designing for uh, before you can come up with effective designs. The 5 phases of design thinking. Empathize with your users. This is an important one. You should always try to be a user advocate. And sorry I keep using the word user. I don't like it. It's just an easy shorthand to go back to. So empathize with your audience. I think I might just start saying audience instead of users. I think it applies almost as well. Define your user's need, your audience's needs, their problems, and your insights from that. Ideate. Ideate means to come up with ideas by challenging assumptions and creating ideas for innovative solutions. Prototype. Start creating solutions. So prototypes are when you build solutions, but they're not finished. It's just a proof of concept to test to see whether the solutions that you've come up with actually work in the real world. And so that's what you do. You take the prototype and you test the prototype. And that's a very high level kind of definition or kind of process for design thinking. I think that one of the key things that's not captured in that, and that you can see in this illustration, this graphic here, is that it's an iterative process. It isn't a linear process. You see understand, explore, materialize. That looks linear. But if you look at the top, you'll see that there's arrows that point back. So you might emphasize, define, ideate, come up with a great idea, make a prototype, test it. The test doesn't work. So you go back and do another prototype. Or maybe at the prototype stage, you realize that you didn't understand something correctly from the empathize stage. So the idea here is that at any point you can step back and iterate again on the design until you get it right. So the idea isn't that we just kind of push right through. We stop at each stage and go, is this correct? And if not, we can go back to a previous stage at any time before we get to the implement stage. So to kind of make this a little bit more real, I want to talk about something that I heard on, I think I mentioned this in my last lecture. One of my favorite podcasts is 99% Invisible. I encourage you all to listen to it, even if you just listen to it at nighttime, because the host, Roman Mars, has this voice that is so warm and comforting, it makes you feel sleepy when you listen to it. But what we see in this picture here is a 3-stone cooking stove. This is a cooking setup that's used in India and many other places in the world. And it's usually, the picture doesn't show this, but usually it's used indoors. The people that often are the ones that are manning the stove are women. Now, the thing about this, it's problematic if you're indoors and you're burning wood like that, there's a lot of smoke that gets released, and it's a huge health problem for these people. The and for years there has been amazing designers and like industrial designers trying to make solutions for them. Oftentimes, it involved like a new stove that might be expensive, or one that uses special material for burning. Um, they all achieve the same. The goal was to make it less smoky, and so all these stove designs all did that. They achieved that purpose. But the problem was nobody was implementing them. Like nobody was using them. They'd give them to villages. They'd be used for a little while and they'd be tossed aside. And nobody could really figure out why. And the reason why is because they didn't talk to the right people. They didn't talk to the women in the villages that actually used the stoves. Because what it turned out was there was one stove design that required the wood to be cut into smaller pieces to be put inside the stove itself. And the problem there was the men, the husbands, didn't want to chop up the wood. That wasn't their job. Cooking was a woman's job. And their old stove worked fine as far as they're concerned. So they had no interest in kind of helping out with the situation. And without the men's help, the woman just found it too difficult to use. So that was one reason that particular application wasn't used. And so what this design team did is they went in and they spoke to the women and they found out what their challenges were. And with that, they were able to come up with a solution that actually solved the problem. Because the problem wasn't so much just reducing smoke. The problem was, how did you reduce smoke but also make it easier for the women that have to maintain these stoves? Right? And nobody was asking the women. They were just going, we need to make a stove that creates less smoke. They got to use wood to burn it. Here's some ideas. And they didn't really talk to the people that it impacted. So the kind of the insight here, the thing they found by empathizing with the people they were talking to, was actually speaking to the women that were using these stoves and finding out what their challenges were. And their challenges were essentially men. If any of these stoves need men to maintain it or chop up wood for it, they weren't going to do it, and the stove wasn't going to be used. So the insight there that's non-obvious that you wouldn't know going into this was that you have to build a system that's easy for just the women to maintain. And the solution, I don't understand the physics of this myself, but this is a $1 piece of metal that you put inside the 3 rocks, and it helps with the way the wood burns. It produces less smoke, and you get more heat from less wood. So this was an ideal solution. The price is right. It didn't require the women to change the way they used the stove at all. They just had to put this in there, and it solved the problem of reducing smoke. So that's just a kind of a living example of how sometimes the important insights that you need to be able to solve a problem can only be seen once you empathize and research. To find a solution, sometimes you need to question your assumptions. So that's basically what I was saying. You can sometimes solutions seem self-evident and obvious to you, but until you learn about the people that are using it, sometimes you might be missing something that's very important. So let's talk about the importance of research. As you can see in design thinking, research is very important. Research is important to understand the needs of your client, understand the needs of your audience, help justify your design decisions to your clients, find solutions that may not be immediately obvious, and get broader acceptance of your project. So let me just talk about this a little bit in more detail. So, like I said, if you're doing work for a company that creates something that you don't have experience with, you need to understand how their business works. And that can only be done by talking to the people that run the business, finding out what their daily tasks are, how they sell the products they sell, what their lives is like. You're a designer, you can't be expected to know how everything works. And so part of that is getting to know your client. On the other side of that, you need to understand the needs of your audience. And by this, I mean, I'm using this instead of the term users, but the people that will be using the site at the end of the day. You don't always know who they are either. Depending on your age, depending on your background, your upbringing, you might have a very different way of using a website or an app than somebody from a different background. This is an important one. It helps justify your design decisions to clients. Now, this is a huge one because as designers, one challenge you're always going to have is you're going to put a beautiful design in front of your client, and the client's going to go, "Why is there so much white space?" or some other comment like that. And you're going to say, "Because it looks nice, right? Because you designed it. Your skill is making things look good, and you applied your skill to this project, and you created a page design that looks beautiful." But the problem is for non-visual people, that isn't often enough. They can't sign off on a design based simply that on the premise that it looks nice. They need more. They need to be able to go back to their superiors and be able to sell them on why this design is the best way to go. And so sometimes research can give you the information you need to push your design forward. You might be using a large font, and the client goes, "Why are the fonts so large? I don't like that." And you can go, "Well, most of the people using your site are 75 and older, and they prefer having large font sizes because it's easier to read." There you go, solve the problem. They have an answer for why you did that, and then they can go back to their boss or their superior and go, "This is the design for us. We've included big fonts here because our audience is on the older side," and then the design gets sold through. Yeah, one of the other things too, this is a bit of an aside, is for some reason, non-visual people tend to not like lots of white space. They seem to think that you're wasting precious real estate. And so they need to be kind of convinced that it's actually easier to read a page. It's actually easier to process information if the information is chunked. If you can go back to them and have these rationales for why you included lots of white space, you're more likely to get it sold through. To be perfectly honest, even if you just designed it that way because it looks better, it's always good to have some ammunition to back up your claims. The research might help you find a solution that might not be immediately obvious, or like a problem that's not immediately obvious. Going back to my fire example, the thing that they didn't really think about was how the role of men in that society affected the usability of the stove. There might be other things like that are affecting or may affect the design at the end of the day that you need to be aware of. And this is a little bit of an odd one. I threw this in. This is get broader acceptance of your project. I've discovered that in my time as a design professional that it's easier. If you have an organization, you might work with the top stakeholders to design a website, and at some point it has to be rolled out. Maybe it's an internal website, it's an intranet or something, and it has to be rolled out to the rest of the company. Now, we've found it's easier to get buy-in by the rest of that company if they're involved in the design process, even if it's only a minor way, even if it's only like you asking them questions like, "What do you think is good about the site? What do you think is bad?" That process itself helps generate positivity and more acceptance from that group of people when you actually go ahead and build the site. So that's a little bit of a life pro tip, but it definitely works. If you can include more people into it, it's easier to get buy-in. User experience research is the systematic study of target users and their requirements to add realistic contexts and insights to design processes. UX researchers adopt various methods to uncover problems and design opportunities. Doing so, they reveal valuable information which can be fed into the design process. Now that's a whole mouthful of words. I think I have a summary here. Or more simply, research helps you to understand challenges and opportunities that may not be immediately apparent. So I think I boiled that down. That's an easier thing to kind of wrap your head around. Research just uncovers stuff that you may not be aware of. So no further ado, what are some research strategies? Before we go any further, just please make note that there are a ton more strategies than this. This is just sort of some of the top ones, sort of handpicked to chat about. During the course of the semester, we're going to touch on a bunch of these. Um, and another thing I want to say, just in complete honesty, is that as a designer, you may not be able to do a lot of these. Oftentimes you're under a deadline, you have to get things done. You won't have the opportunity to do an empathy map or a customer journey map. At the same time, you should try to do some kind of research. Ask your client if it's possible to do interviews with the people that use the site or key stakeholders in the company. Try to do some kind of research if you can. Like I said, it's often difficult. It's easier when you have larger companies that have longer timelines for development of things. They will often be happy because they're investing a certain amount of money in it. They want to see the research. But early in your career, it might be hard to do a lot of this stuff. So that's my little caveat there. So what are some research strategies? Interviews, surveys, contextual interviews, competitive research, use cases, A/B testing, data analysis, and metrics. So let's go through each one of those quickly. Interviews, well, I already talked about that. So interviews is just when you have a one-on-one discussion with people that are involved in what you're doing. So whether that's key stakeholders of the company, clients, suppliers, end users, anybody that's involved in it. And you'll be surprised at how much valuable insight you can get just by having a casual conversation and asking some questions about the site. Surveys, a series of questions asked to multiple users of your website that help you learn about the people who visit your site. So these are traditionally surveys that pop up on websites as you're using them. I'm sure you've seen them before. I don't know how there's some use to these for sure. My one fear about surveys is that you're going to get people that fill in surveys that answer them all the time, and they may not be indicative of your entire audience, right? There's people that are very motivated and have opinions and want to express them. It doesn't mean that they have the same experience that everybody else does. So I think sometimes their opinion gets kind of focused on when that may not be representative of everybody's experience. You see this in focus groups too. You get a bunch of people together in a room and you ask them whether they like the flavor of this new Kool-Aid or whatever. And you'll often end up with one or two people that become like the spokesman for the group, and they start guiding the process, and it ends up being more about their personal opinions than the opinions of the group. So it's something you got to watch out for. Contextual interviews. So this would be you sitting with an audience member, with an employee, with an end user, and seeing how they use the site in their natural environment. Because you're going to, like in one of our classes, you're going to learn about that context is important for UX design work. One easy kind of description of context is, are they on a desktop or are they using their mobile device for this? Because those are two completely different experiences. And some sites, more people are going to consume on their laptop if it's work related or whatever. Other ones, people are going to consume on their mobile phones. And those are two completely different contexts. And oftentimes you won't be aware of those contexts unless you're sitting with the user and seeing them, because they may be doing a task and doing part of the task on their desktop, part of it on their phone. So seeing them working in their natural environment gives you a better sense of how they're using the product that you're working on. Competitive research. So this is when you go out and have a look at what other competitors the company you're working for are doing. It's often, I use the expression standing on the shoulders of giants. It means like, don't start at the beginning. Have a look at what other people are doing well. Have a look at what other people are doing poorly. All that information you can use, and you can use that information to stand on the shoulders of giants. You can stand on top of the work that's already been done, and that makes your work better. So, we do competitive research a lot when we're doing website design. We go out and we look at the direct competitors of the company we're doing the work for, but oftentimes we'll also find tangential, because sometimes in an industry, like we've done quite a bit of work for the insurance, like many of the sites are terrible, and you're not going to find any kind of inspiration there. But you might find inspiration in like a ride sharing site that doesn't isn't in the same business, but maybe it has a process that is similar to buying insurance. That was just I'm not actually saying a ride sharing site is the best one for that. All I'm saying is that sometimes you find inspiration in other things that aren't direct competitors. Use cases. This is when I use this a lot too, and I actually use it backwards from the way we're talking about it right here. So a use case is when you write a description of how users use a particular feature of your website or use your website. They provide a detailed look at how users interact with the site, including the steps users take to accomplish each task. So I do write these. I have to write use cases all the time. But it's interesting to talk about use cases because I often ask clients, what's the use case for that? Because sometimes people have not thought it through. They have an idea, but they don't actually think about how a person's going to use that idea. And so, even though I write use cases often when I'm doing quotes and statements of work, I will include them anyways, just to make it clear because it's easier to describe something as in the process. So let me just give you an example. So a use case would be, um, so a video game, for example. So a use case would be the user is represented on screen by a character. It's a side scroller game, so the character can move left, right, up, down. There are obstacles that the character can encounter that they can jump over or they can shoot their laser gun. There's an end goal for each level that has to be attained by doing X, Y, and Z. So you can see what I'm doing. I'm actually like saying very specifically what the user does and how it's represented on screen. That's kind of a use case, right? And instead of going like, this is a fun video game where you jump around, by actually explaining it like that in detail, that reveals kind of where things can sometimes fall apart. So you can see like, oh, we're missing something here. And also clients understand it better than just kind of creative high level talk. A/B testing, this is pretty easy. You've probably been A/B tested and don't know it. Facebook apparently does it all the time. So A/B testing is when you're testing out something about a website. Maybe it's a purchase. Maybe it's like a form that gets you to buy something, and you want to test out. Like maybe there's some discussion, internally about whether the button, the purchase button, should be a big red button or whether it should be underlined text or whether it should flash. So with A/B testing, what you do is you'd create the same form and just change that element on each one. So you do 3 of them. When users come to your site, they would randomly be selected one of those 3 sites. And then you collect data on that, and that data will tell you which one of those buttons is the most effective. Now, you as the user, you as the person coming to the website, you don't actually know you're seeing something different than everybody else. So it's kind of weird. There's some ethics about this because, like I said, Facebook is doing this, but they're doing it to figure out what's more addictive for you, right? But you don't even know they're doing it to you. I think A/B testing to figure out which buttons are more effective is not so bad in the grand scheme of things. But yeah, does that make sense to you? So basically, you create 3 versions of the same thing with 1 change in each version. Those pages are randomly sent to different people. You gather results from those people using it, and you see which one's more effective for getting the click-throughs. Data analysis of metrics. This is essentially often just like looking at the Google Analytics. So when you have a website, everything's tracked. Like the users coming to the site are all tracked. We have tons of data about all that stuff. But it's great, if you're going to redesign a website or you want to fix a problem on an existing website, you can look at the data there and see like maybe every day 100 people come to your site and then like 90 people go to the second page on the site, but then everybody drops off after that page. Well, that's a clear sign there's something wrong with that page, right? And the metrics can lead you to where these problematic areas are. So this is your first assignment. It's worth 10%. Don't freak out. I'm giving you an assignment now. We'll be doing a workshop on empathy mapping next week. So don't get worried that you don't understand. We're going to talk about it next week and have some time to chat about it and actually do an empathy mapping exercise together. So this is what an empathy map looks like. It's a way of gathering research about the way people interact with a website or an app. It could be used for anything. It doesn't have to be a website or app. You will find in this course, I default to this because most of your assignments are about interface design. So it's marked off, says, thinks, does, feels, with the user in the middle. So what you would do is, the whole idea of creating an empathy map is you choose a website. I'm actually totally open with what website you choose. You give a user a task. So you get a friend or buddy, relative, mom, dad, whatever. You get them, sit them down in front of the website, and you give them a task. You say, for example, buy a pair of running shoes off Amazon, and you get them to do the task. But while they're doing the task, you pay attention to what they're doing. You ask them questions about how they're feeling. You look at their face to see whether they're, happy or frustrated. You pay attention to what their experience is like, and that's where you get the information to fill in this empathy map. So, says is pretty self-evident. So you have to go, damn, where is that thing? And then you write down, says, damn, where is that thing? Right? They're having trouble finding something on the website. By looking at their face, you can, or by asking them, you can figure out what they're thinking. It's like, what are you thinking right now? And the person says, well, I'm confused. I don't know where to go now. Does would be describing what they're doing physically. Maybe they're clicking all over the page because they can't find the link they want to get to. Feels, this one's a little bit harder. This is where you have to use your empathy to get a sense of what they're feeling. Are they filled with joy because they were able to find the shoes they wanted right away, or more likely, to be honest, were they feeling some level of annoyance at not being able to complete the task they were trying to do? So like I said, we'll talk more about that next week, but I'll give you the assignment today. So the purpose of this assignment is to demonstrate the importance of defining a problem and how this can really depict how successful the project will be. Defining a problem includes an empathy stage, and this will be included in the assignment. Empathy mapping and documentation will be included in defining the problem. Step 1, you'll be choosing a Humber service such as food services, parking, athletics, Aboriginal Center. If you wish to choose something else, please run the idea past your professor first. I am okay with you doing something else first. I would suggest you do something that you have a personal interest in and something that is problematic, right? Like if you find a site that just works amazingly well, I'm sure there's some problems you're going to find, but this project and your following projects will be much easier if you choose something that is challenging or needs to be fixed. Just to be perfectly honest there. So yeah, if you want to run your website, if you're fine with it and you want to go the easy path, just choose humber.ca and choose one of those sections like food service, parking, athletics. They've all got problems, so those are those are a good one to start with. But if there's something else that's closer to your heart that you would rather work on, that's more exciting to you, just let me know, and that should be fine. I'm totally open with that. Step 2, analyze and synthesize the perceived problems at hand. So what this means is have a look at the website and go, what's problematic? Like you have to identify there's something wrong with it. Step 3, put together an empathy map and take photos. So what you want to do is, put your grandma in front of the site, get her to do the task. So it's important here to establish that there's a task that has to be completed. And watch them and ask them questions as they're doing it, record the information, and put the information into an empathy map. I would prefer if the empathy map is actually, you can do it handwritten for the research phase, but when you present it to me, when you create your presentation deck, I would like for it to be designed somewhat. So the next step is to write your point of view statement. This is something that the students always seem to have a bit of a challenge with. So I'll spend some time about this next week. But a point of view is a meaningful, actionable problem statement. So the one thing to take away here is that the solution shouldn't be in the point of view. It should be identifying the problem. So for example, the structure is what the users who the users are, what they're doing, what their needs are, and what comes out of that is the surprising insight. So, um, a financial advisor who meets with clients needs to facilitate meaningful conversations with more clients through the day because there's a surprising insight. The user spends a lot of time dealing with paperwork. His real passion and where his business grows is through genuine conversations with clients. Paperwork and account management is essential to the business, but by the time he's working on those logistics, the sale is made and it is unprofitable time. So what you have here is an insight. We don't have a solution to the problem. So how this would translate into a point of view would be a financial advisor needs a way to have meaningful conversations with more clients because business grows through genuine conversations with clients, not through paperwork. So you kind of see how we got there from here, got here from there. We identified who the user is. It's a financial advisor who meets with clients. The need is they need to have more meaningful conversations. The insight after talking to them and asking them questions and empathizing with them is that they're so frustrated because they spend all day spending time doing paperwork. So that translates into this. A financial advisor needs a way to have meaningful conversations with more clients because business grows through genuine conversation with clients, not through paperwork. So that is the point of view statement. But like I said, we'll talk about it more next week. And thank you. That it is now taco time. And I'll probably have a quick check-in with all of you this week. Thank you and have a fantastic week.